Okay, Rich. The president, on the retirement of Justice Souter, said that he was going to look for a replacement on the Supreme Court. And one of the qualifications, one of the most important qualifications, would be empathy. And in Justice Sotomayor, he thought he'd find it. This is still a topical issue because the president is going to have other opportunities to appoint justices, probably to the Supreme Court. And there are seats on the Second Circuit, which is important to us, and of course around the country. You and I have debated this issue at some length. Let's hear you on the record.
Well, before we can talk about whether that's a good idea, I think we have to try to understand what the president means when he says he wants judges with empathy. Does he mean, on the one hand, judges who are sensitive to the fact that their cases have real-world implications, sometimes matters of life and death, that affect people and affect their businesses? That seems like a good idea, but why not just say that then? That's what good judges do. They understand and are sensitive to and respectful to the litigants and the lawyers before them. I suspect what the president really means when he says empathy is code word for favorable disposition toward liberal interest groups like labor unions, certain minority groups, people with disabilities, and other people that the Democrats think are more likely to vote for them. Sort of a real-world application of the philosophy of critical legal studies, which is that all law is political, and that use it for political ends, to advance the ends of your political interest group. So I suspect that that's what the president means when he says he's looking for judges with empathy. But if that's what he means, he ought to come out and say that and let the American people really decide whether those are the kinds of judges that we want. Judges who are biased in favor of democratic interest groups.
All right, I'm not sure I agree with you. First, let's look at what the president actually said. He gave a speech to Planned Parenthood in 2007 where he first spelled out his view that empathy would be an important qualification in choosing judges. And he emphasized that again when Justice Souter resigned. And what did he say? He said, in 95% of the cases that come before judges, the law is going to be fairly clear, and the outcome is one that won't be arguable by most judges. But in those 5% of the cases where the law isn't clear, he said a justice is going to have to look to his heart. And when the justice does that, it's important for the judge to understand how the law is going to affect real people. So he wasn't saying, I think, let's just pick somebody who will vote all the time in favor of the liberal Democratic constituency. He was saying, what do we want a judge to appeal to in those tough cases, those 5% of the cases? But tails you win, heads you lose. I'll give you, for the sake of argument, your view that he was just using it as a tipping point for a type of person. So what? The United States Supreme Court is one of the most political institutions in the country. Everybody knows that. There are 4 hardcore conservatives on the court right now and 1 swing vote. What's wrong with a president who's won a popular mandate, in terms of his political affiliation, with deciding to appoint somebody who's going to balance the power in the other direction?
Well, I have 2 things to say. First is, if that's what you're saying, then come out and say it. Don't hide behind, well, I want judges that are empathetic. Come out and say, I want judges who reflect my political point of view. Okay, and let the American people decide whether those are the judges they really want. Not, I only want judges, who are empathetic, when I really mean I want judges who agree with me and my constituents. Okay? Number 2, I mean, to say that, well, 95% of all cases are easy. I mean, what you're really then saying is I want judges who agree with me and who are sympathetic to my constituents in the 5% of cases that probably really matter. So, I mean, I don't know that you're conceding anything when you say, well, in 95% of the cases, the answer is going to be the same no matter who decides it. That's probably true. The real test, especially as you move up the chain towards the Supreme Court, are not the easy cases, it's the hard cases. I mean, anybody can rule that a prior restraint on speech is unconstitutional. The question comes, on a real tough case on the First Amendment, or a real tough case on the Second Amendment, or an abortion case. That's where it's really tough. So the notion that somehow, it doesn't really matter about all these other cases, well, it only matters in a few cases, so don't worry about it, but those are the cases that really matter.
I agree with you. Those are the cases that really matter.
That's probably the only thing that we agree on.
Well, that's true. But let me give you one example of why I think, a real-life example of where I think empathy made a difference and a positive difference for the nation. 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren sitting on the Supreme Court, and the court has heard but not yet decided Brown versus Board of Education. You're a history buff. You probably remember the story about the Chief Justice. He's has his African-American chauffeur taking him on a drive through Virginia to see, I think, Civil War sites. And the Chief Justice spends a night at a hotel. When he comes out the next morning, he finds his chauffeur sleeping in the car. And that hits home to him just how segregated the nation was and what a real impact, real world impact, Plessy versus Ferguson had. And he went back to the court and was able to persuade all 8 of his fellow justices to come out unanimously in support of Brown versus Board.
I mean, that's a very legal realist. I mean, in some ways, it's a very scary legal realist statement. What if the Chief Justice's chauffeur had been white? Where would we be?
Exactly.
I mean, that's really a case of what the judge had for breakfast. Actually, it's a case of who drove the judge that day. I mean, you know, and I think that's really sort of the problem with, you know, leftist jurisprudence, which is, you know, it all boils down to politics, but because it's a kind of politics that they know a lot of Americans disagree with, they won't come out and say that. They hide it behind empathy, or they hide it behind really complicated, you know, law review articles that nobody can really understand. So, you know, I think you and I are going to have to agree to disagree on this, like so many other things we talk about.
Fair enough, Rich.
Till next time, Waring versus Clow.
We'll see you.